All right, it's about 2 minutes after 1. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to kick this over to our humanities team.
Thanks so much, Julie. Hi, everyone. You may recognize me, some of you. My name is Alex McLean. I'm the placement associate for history and religious studies. And we're really excited to be able to put together this webinar today. And we hope it's informative and helpful during these strange times for conducting a job search, and help to just share some insight on what we're seeing, what we're hearing, and provide some help in this process. And so just to get things started, I wanted to pass it around the room for our panelists today on the humanities team. Again, I'm Alex, and then I'll pass it over to Maddie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Maddie Fumara. I've been working with some of you for English for a while or throughout the year. So I'm handling English language arts, and then kind of jointly with Alex and Namita, kind of general humanities positions for Carney Sandoe. Namita?
Hi, everybody. I'm Namita. I probably email a lot of you guys. I assist Maddie specifically with English, and then partner with Maddie and Alex and Leanne on a greater humanities team. Yeah, excited to get started and answer questions and all of that.
Excellent. And you may notice too, Leanne Parker works with me closely on the history and humanities team. She's actually taking part as a member today, watching the webinar, keeping us informed on how things are going. But Leanne is also an excellent, amazing resource, as many of you know. And so just another face to the name there. But basically for today, what we've done is we've kind of broken things out into 3 main areas that we think would be most helpful. But before we dive into those, I just want to share some logistics in terms of how we're going to move forward. For all attendees, you're muted, your video isn't up, so you don't have to worry about if you have to leave the room or coffee break, or if you're like me or Maddie, if one of your kids runs into the room, that's okay.
Bear with us.
We do have a Q&A box that we've opened up, and we highly encourage people to use. We'll see those questions. We won't be answering those questions as we go through these initial, 3 areas, but we will be getting to those at the end as best we can. And we are reserving time at the end. So, if you have a question that pops up, just fire it into the Q&A box and we'll be going through there. Don't feel like you need to save it for the very end.
And if we see more specific questions that we aren't able to get to, we'll try to reach out to you individually afterwards.
Exactly. Yeah. And as always, our email or phone, with your team, always happy to help, whether you send an email or through Canada Connect, a message to your team. And as well, we're going to be recording this today, and everyone will receive a copy. So if you're only able to make it for part of the time today and need to leave, or have some questions and want to refer back, that will be available for everyone. But to start things off, we thought it would be most helpful to touch on just kind of the general timeline, what we're seeing, what how things have gone in the past comparatively, just to provide some insight. And I think Maddie's going to start us off.
Yeah. So one of the questions, I think, as we were kind of preparing for this, we were talking about what are some of the things that we're getting asked the most. And I think that probably hands down, the question that we're hearing from everybody is, what are schools hiring? Are there still jobs out there? Which is, an understandable question. And so to kind of put things in context, typically, in a normal year, for us, kind of when schools get back from break in January is when things kind of kick into gear in terms of hiring. That's when a lot of schools get their positions listed and start doing interviewing and coming to conferences and bringing people to campus. And that really extends, and it, like I said, in a normal year through April, May, early part of May. We would kind of consider that to be sort of our busy season. Obviously this year, I would say, by early March, most schools that we work with were kind of putting all their focus on distance learning plans. And, some had been interviewing up until that point. Others had made some hires by that point. But really by, early March, I would say, and Anita and Alex chime in if I'm off base here, I would say things had really kind of, for a lot of places been put on hold. I think our last week in the office was around March 13th. And so there was just a period of time where I think the focus was pretty strongly on putting distance learning plans into place. So this year is, feeling obviously much different for many reasons, but, in terms of hiring, there was a pretty significant pause as schools kind of were trying to figure out how to move forward, what their needs were going to be, what the enrollment is going to look like for the fall. And even still, there are still a lot of schools that do have open positions. Some have said, we're going to put things on hold for now. We have a hiring freeze for the moment, but we're going to see, like I said, what enrollment looks like, and really what the plan is for the fall. I think a lot of schools are prepping a lot of different plans, and their hiring needs might be determined by which direction they go in. So, right now we are still getting some new positions coming in as school, some schools know for sure that they still need to hire for certain openings. And they're moving forward with those searches. Others are saying, across the board, there's a freeze and we'll kind of figure things out in late May about how to go forward.
Yeah, I think, well said, Maddie. I think what we find around this time of year that there are kind of a few different types of positions that come up. One is the position that's contingent on whether or not the person, who they would be filling decides to leave. So that situation comes up if a teacher, maybe is looking for a position, has let their school know, but hasn't officially accepted anything yet before contracts come out. So the school may list a position, start having some interviews, or at least gathering some, applications in the process should that person leave. Now, another type of position is maybe more of the aspirational position. Oh, we really wanted to add these courses, or if enrollment really jumps up, we're going to see, these openings, and this is the type of person we need to bring in, or, we're expecting to expand our department, or whatever it might be. So not necessarily filling a space, but for growth or for a change within the school. And then the other positions are ones that are, openings that the person is moving on, or whatever reason, they have a position they need to fill. And, what we saw is that maybe some more of those positions, which typically kind of close up around this time of year anyway, for people who are deciding on whether or not to sign their contract, or, maybe they're saying, okay, maybe the enrollment's shaking out, we'll hold that position that maybe we were hoping to add this year, we'll do next year. We're seeing some more of those positions kind of close up or maybe be put on hold for the future, but there's still that portion of positions and new opportunities coming in the door that are definite openings, and schools need to hire, and they did not disappear. So while we may have seen some of these positions that in other years, maybe people take a chance, they don't sign their contract, maybe they're a little more hesitant this year, or holding off and pushing to next year. There are still those definite openings that are out there, and schools need to fill. And I think with the ideal timeline still to try and hire by the early summer if possible, and those positions do come up during the summer too. So there are still options out there, I would say, and we anticipate more coming in the coming months too.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the process, once you're interviewing with a school, obviously it's a little bit different now that everything's going to be done virtually. But I think, a lot of what they want to see kind of remains the same. They'll want you to interview with a lot of different people, and either by phone first, or just right to, Skype or Zoom, or some form of video interview. They'll definitely still want you to do some sort of a teaching demo. I think, from what we've heard from schools, some are, people are doing that a little bit differently from school to school. Some are having kind of virtual demos with their own students. Others are kind of setting up faculty demos where they're kind of just sort of showing what they can do to the faculty. And then others are saying, you know, if you could find some way to record yourself teaching and show us what you're doing in your current role, you know, we'd be happy to see that. So they still want to see you teaching. And I think, you know, Alex may have touched on this as well, like some of the new positions that are opening up, you know, it's the nice thing is that I think they could have the potential to move fairly quickly through the process, especially since there's no need to arrange travel or anything like that. It could be a, you know, shorter than what we would typically see in terms of a, you know, start to the end of the process.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, that's something that I think we've both been seeing is while there are, you know, this is a different process that schools are trying to navigate, you know, there are some benefits in that, you know, you don't need to travel, you don't need to organize, you know, time on site, you know everyone's scheduled pretty well right now for, you know, across your team, so you can work around that pretty quickly. And so, you know, where in the past it may be, okay, you know, we did a phone review, you know, next step, maybe coming out to campus, let's try and find a time in the next, you know, couple weeks. Whereas now it may be, what's your schedule like in 2 days? And let's put together a Zoom call or Zoom interview. But I think, you know, I think those resources in terms of, you know, any way you can show the work you're, you know, doing in the classroom or what that, you know, may look like, I think is great to have either at the ready or, you know, should a school request it, or, you know, available to send and something that you offer. And I think Namita will touch on this later. There's space within your profile to be able to add, you know, video and you know, online resources, you know, about yourself that might be able to supplement some of these things. But yeah.
I'd also add we have aggregated a great kind of resource for focusing specifically on virtual hiring. And that's, you can find it in our blog page. If you go to our website, the second you log into Candidate Connect, it comes up. So it's popping up in a couple of different places, but it's focusing specifically on the virtual hiring process. So there's, you know, feedback from schools, feedback from other candidates who have gone through a virtual process, and just talking about, you know, what their own experience is and what they're kind of anticipating that to look like.
And I think that leads us, you know, well into the next point, which is what are schools' expectations at this time in terms of, you know, what there's candidates and, you know, what resources you'll have available for them, what questions will come up, you know, what will the demo lesson look like. And so I think as far as, you know, kind of initial expectations, you know, what we were touching on is, you know, having that ability to be able to connect in whatever format, you know, the school uses. So being fluent in Zoom or, you know, Google Hangout or, you know, Skype or whatever the school's process is, I think that's just going to be a given for most schools, that you'll be able to connect that way. And, you know, still the same, you know, expectations in terms of, you know, presenting yourself as a professional and you know, having, you know, flexibility. On the other hand, I think schools also understand that we're in a very strange time. So as far as expectations in terms of your schedule and being able to work around that, especially if you're teaching, I think the schools have flexibility too. But as far as the demo lesson, I think for most schools, they are still, you know, anticipating and trying to do as close to as full a day as possible to be able to, you know, provide you with the opportunity to meet a wide range of members on the team, share that demonstration lesson, or, you know, maybe it's you talking about what your lesson might look like, you know, or, you know, sometimes schools are able to pull together a group of students that you can teach. But I think initially the expectation is, you know, a lot of things are happening on video. So being able to connect and be flexible to whatever, you know, whatever the school prefers, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. I was chatting with a candidate the other day who asked a really great question. She was had been speaking with a school and interviewing with a school hiring contact And she had all these questions she wanted to answer. And she was saying, you know, is this too many questions? Am I going to be putting someone off by asking all these questions in the interview process? And, you know, I just thought it was such a great question, because no, definitely not. I would say, if anything, right now, you're going to be asking so many more questions than you would typically during the interview process, because, you know, usually when you're visiting a school, you know, so much of what you learn about the school kind of comes about organically from walking through campus and getting a feel for the place and getting a sense of the culture and the people. And, you know, now when you're interviewing, a big part of that is going to be you asking questions that, you know, might seem like silly questions, but they're not silly, because, you know, you need to know still that it's a good fit. And so feeling confident and comfortable, just, you know, saying, like, I've got a ton of questions. I'm hoping that, and people, you know, these are all school people. They're happy to chat and tell you about their school. They want to do it. And so don't feel funny about asking tons of questions. I think that's something that for me recently that I would have wanted to highlight.
I think, you know, knowing that schools are in the same boat and they are having the same questions and concerns in terms of how do we best, you know, show what our school is like, what our community is like, and our culture and the people here and our students, without being able to get you to campus. So I always say, you know, if it's something where you're on the fence, or if you have questions and you aren't sure, on the school side, they would always rather receive those questions and have you basically give them a shot, you know, and put that forward so that they can, you know, help fill those gaps and help answer those questions, you know, as opposed to just having them linger and be something you worry about. And we're also a great resource there too. If you have questions, sometimes there are, you know, things you want to know about a school or a position or you know, salary or whatever it might be. And sometimes those questions are you know, more easily directed to us. And we're always happy to help, you know, offer that guidance as well.
And I think just being kind of prepared right around now, or just using this time to be prepared with, you know, anecdotes about your own teaching, how you've shifted from, you know, a classroom to a virtual classroom, what you've done. You know, we'll get into this more, but I think we've touched on a little bit. The more you can show about what you've been doing, the better. So if you have the ability to, you know, record yourself teaching in some way, I think that would be amazing. Or like some, you know, curriculum plans, or even just a write-up on how you've shifted certain things electronically, and, you know, start thinking about how you'd answer some of their questions. Like, what's been hard about this? What's been something that you feel like has worked really well? How have you managed to stay connected to your students when teaching remotely and virtually? Just kind of thinking about some things that they would ask. And like I said, what you'd want to ask them, you know, might be interesting to hear a little bit more about how a school has done, you know, made that shift to virtual learning and distance learning. And so don't feel shy about asking those questions as well.
Yeah.
Maybe want to add to, if you're, you know, someone who's finishing up a bachelor's or a master's program, and you're, you know, not in the teaching side of things, but you're actually on the student side of things, that's, you know, equally as important. You're having that firsthand interaction with distance learning on the student side, and can really get a sense of, you know, what is working from a teacher's and what isn't, and, you know, that bring what, you know, you have to the table, kind of think about your own assets and kind of pivot in that sense.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Anita. I think you have such an interesting perspective from that angle versus the classroom, where it's, you know, we may see it as, oh, I haven't been teaching, but, you know, that's a way you can address it and share that insight. So I think that's
or similarly, if you've been teaching at the college level and, you know, maybe teaching remotely that way, like how might that teaching look different than the teaching you do for a high school student, you know, thinking about how you could address that and kind of speak to your experience, but make it more, you know, bring it more to a high school setting, like thinking about how you can kind of frame that in an interview.
And I think sometimes if you're coming from the college, you know, level or from higher ed, sometimes you've maybe you're a little more familiar with these resources, and online is a bigger part of your plan anyway. That's something we were talking about as a team the other day. So I think no matter where you're coming from in your search, there's a perspective that you can bring to this situation that schools will be asking about that I think, offers quite a bit. But, again, as far as, expectations, from the school side, at this point, and for most schools, it's not going to be something where you're going to be able to visit campus. Maybe at best, a empty campus, walk through with this, with social distancing. But for the most part, all of this is happening virtually. So, an expectation on your end is to know, if I do need to make a decision, it is something I'm going to, they're going to try to fill those gaps as much as they can. But it is something where I'm going to have to go, sight unseen in terms of making a decision. And again, we are always happy to be a great resource at that point as well, just in terms of, a lot of us have visited these campuses themselves and happy to share from our time there. We work really closely with, the administration. We've helped other people join that school. We've worked with people who maybe moved on from the school for, a variety of reasons. And so always happy to share, any insight there that might help fill those gaps as well. But I always think, something too, if you are going through that process, I think, a great question to ask is always to see if maybe you can be put in touch with a faculty member who, something where you'd be relocating, someone that relocated to the school within the past couple of years that might be able to provide context, especially if it's a new city or a new area that you haven't been to. Finding someone who came from a different, from a similar background that might be able to share some insight. And, I think schools are always happy to, to help make that connection too. But a lot of this is, I think schools are doing a great job of showing showing their school and their culture, but it is something where, sight is definitely unseen at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. And just a reminder to anyone, feel free to submit questions. We're going to leave plenty of time at the end to answer any questions that you have. So through that, what is it, the Q&A button? Is that right? And we'll go through and answer them all, as many as we can at the end.
Yeah, and if it's a specific question to you too, feel free to put it in there. These are just coming to us, so if it's something we're happy to follow up and connect outside of this too, if it's something really particular to your search as well. So no bad questions. And then the last area that we wanted to address is, what are things that you can do on your end to, help highlight your skills, your talents, your interests, to relay to us what you're looking for, and, just make sure that we're as up to date as possible on, on your search and what you're looking for. So I think I'm going to hand it over to Namita, who's going to touch on this and walk through a little bit with something I'm sure you're all familiar with, Candidate Connect, or if you're not familiar with it, great to get a look at it now.
Yes, so hopefully all of you are familiar with Candidate Connect. This is the fake me as a candidate. And so right now I'm set as not looking, but you would all be set as actively looking. That just indicates to us that you're keeping up with your search. So kind of just maybe giving an overview of Candidate Connect for those who need a refresher. And like I had mentioned earlier, this is the area with the virtual hiring resources. But a couple of things I just want to point out. So there are some profile enhancement questions, and I kind of think of these as questions that might pop up in that first phone interview, things that you want to address to a school. So with these questions, any of the answers that you have here are going to be shared directly with the school in your own words. So it's a great way to kind of advocate for yourself in a search and kind of, put your own voice to a search directly. And then you can go through and see your different, search criteria. This is all things that aren't shared specifically with the school, but give us kind of information about what you're thinking in your own search. And then here would be your portfolio. So when we're presenting your candidacy to a school, or sending your materials to a school, this is what we're sharing. So, you know, they're getting a resume, letters of recommendation, personal statement, transcripts for those where it's applicable. And then I have some things here that are hidden as well. So these are maybe duplicates of things, or, you know, say I think this letter of reference just isn't as strong as maybe these other two. Or maybe, you know, someone wrote it for a specific school, not in, you know, understanding my request, they've uploaded it, and you can just go ahead and hide that to a school. In terms of letters of recommendation, just kind of timeline wise, so these are from 2019. They would, you know, if I think that they still make sense and you know, reflect my own candidacy, I want to keep them up there. Those that are out of date, you know, a couple of years old, or, you know, are referring to specific schools, aren't really, you know, hitting on what your own search is, I maybe wouldn't include. For folks coming from higher ed, if it's really just focusing exclusively on your own research and less so on your own teaching ability, I like to say maybe a general rule of thumb for letters of rec are either highlighting, you know, your experience in the classroom or subject area expertise. With letters of rec, you can always request them here. You would input folks' email address and they can upload them directly to your Candidate Connect account, but obviously we recognize that folks are busy right now. And so one thing that I've been recommending is just requesting, when you're asking for a letter of recommendation, if you can list folks as references while they're drafting those letters. So I have Maddie and Alex as two great references. And you can just add and edit folks as you're going through. We've been mentioning a lot about adding online materials, and this is a great way to do it. If you have, you know, specific discussion videos or things that you might have been playing in class that you want to add. You can add, you know, YouTube links, Vimeo links. One thing I would maybe put a reminder out there that privacy in terms of recording classes, there are, you know, legalities that are involved with that. So, you know, talk to your school or talk to us about kind of those intricacies. But this is kind of the online portfolio. And then you can actually view how schools see your own profile. If you want to see, you know, how am I coming across, this would be it. And they can view, you know, your experience, search criteria, things like that. But that is kind of the general Candidate Connect overview. Hopefully that was helpful, and I'll turn it back to you guys to kind of hit on the different ways to highlight your profile.
Excellent. Thanks, Demi.
Yeah, that's great.
That's terrific. Yeah, I would say, you know, another great portion, just this is something that isn't shared with the schools, but is shared with us, is, you know, to make sure, something that we use quite a bit on our end in terms of, you know, choosing the positions that we present to you and put you in touch with, is based on what preferences you have listed as far as where you're open to going geographically, and the types of schools that you're interested in. So, you know, always it's a larger section, so but it's important, and we, you know, look at that very closely. And I think especially at these times, you know, for schools that are hiring, they really want to know, is this someone who, you know, would make the move for our school? Or, you know, if things have changed and you're really only focusing your search locally or in specific areas, that's extremely helpful to know. So as far as, you know, making updates to your profile, you know, that's a great place that isn't necessarily shared with schools, but is shared with us, and is very important, and we rely on, you know, quite a bit, you know, in terms of, you know, making sure that we're up to speed on what you're looking for. And what I would say there too is just in terms of, you know, the market at the moment, you know, I think as far as conducting a search, just with the positions that we're seeing, there are certainly and absolutely positions still out there, but it is more difficult at this time to do a pretty tailored or specific search geographically, just because we're seeing, you know, fewer opportunities in each specific area, but we are seeing a range of opportunities. So if you have flexibility and you're open to relocating and looking at different areas, that can be extremely helpful in terms of, seeing more opportunities. And the nice part too is, if you are open to a coast to coast move, all of the interviewing is being, is taking place over video. So you don't need to travel, you just need to coordinate times. But another thing to just make sure that you're highlighting and keeping an eye on in your profile and letting us know, if anything changes there.
Yeah, and I think it's always it would be a good time now to kind of look through your resume and make sure that everything's on there that you want. Since things have shifted a little bit, it might be time to put on some other additional skills, like some technologies that maybe you hadn't been using when you wrote your resume, but now you're using every day. So just kind of go through, make sure it's got everything on there, because my guess is that if you are teaching right now, your teaching looks pretty different than it did when you wrote your resume. So I would, take a look at that, see if there's anything that you want to add. We can always take additional, I think we always ask for a resume, personal statement, letters of recommendation, references, and kind of to profile is up to date and current. But if you have other materials that you want us to take as well, we can do that. Someone recently submitted a really good diversity teaching statement, which I thought was great. If you had it like a write-up that you wanted to do about the shift to virtual learning, anything like that, feel free to be creative in what you want to show. And I think let me just show this, but the links, there's a place for links about if you have kind of an online portfolio as well, or if you just have like some teaching demos or curriculum mapping that you wanted to show there as well. And
to touch on the demo lesson again, Namita just touched on this, but as far as, sometimes there are some, for lack of a better term, red tape in terms of what you can present, what you can share. I would definitely take a look at our virtual, hiring resources on our website, which there are great articles about, different ideas how to navigate that. But I think there are different approaches you can take. Obviously, if you aren't able to show students or include students, that's fine, and that's okay. Schools don't necessarily need that. But even if it's you just talking about, for 10 minutes, what your class would look like, showing an outline, how you would break it down, what your classroom feels like, what, students are doing, just kind of talking about what a school would see if they were to walk in and see you teaching. So there are other ways that you can present that material, even if it's not necessarily showing, a demo lesson or a recorded lesson. But I think having something prepared like that is great to include, and a great way to show your talents and your teaching style.
Yeah, and if you are recording something with kids, just make sure you get the appropriate permissions and all that. Make sure you have all the information there. I think some people are totally fine, would feel comfortable doing that, and other people might not. But you might be able to cut it, if they give you permission to record it, but not use the kids, and you can just kind of use yourself. But definitely look into that and make sure you, before you submit anything, make sure that everything is all squared away that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think those cover the main topics that we wanted to cover today, but have questions coming up, and we definitely want to make sure that we have time for those. So if you've been holding on to a question, feel free to send it our way. But I think we'll just start going through these on our end and get to as many as we can in the next couple minutes. And I think one question is about timing on things. I see a position that I've been referred to. It was listed earlier this year or a couple months ago, or was, it's still showing on my candidate page, and I haven't had a chance to follow up on it. Yeah, what does that look like? Is that something where I should reach out? You know, what should I do? What I would say there is that, you know, on our end, what we're doing is we're working very diligently to make sure that those positions that you're seeing are active searches at these schools, and you know, that the schools are still hiring and you know, closing out those positions that, you know, are no longer open. So those are automatically removed, you know, as soon as we find out, and as soon as we know that, you know, the position is freeze or on hold. So if you see a position and it says hold or closed or is no longer there, that's a communication that we've had with the school to relay that message. But if it's still up there on your profile and you're still seeing the position and you're interested, but maybe you haven't had the chance to follow up, that's still an active and live search. And it's a great time now to follow up with them. Or maybe it's something you applied a couple of weeks ago and haven't heard anything. Now's a great time to follow up and reiterate your interest in that opportunity if it's still open.
Mm-hmm. I saw one person asked about when we think the recruiting season is going to end given the pandemic. And I would say our expectation is that it will kind of keep going throughout the rest of the year. And who knows, maybe even into the early parts of the fall. I mean, we always get openings during the spring, during the summer, kind of late breaking openings. So I don't think this would be any different than that. But again, I think that I think a lot of schools were waiting to see what their enrollment numbers look like and kind of what the structure of school was going to look like in the fall. So I think as they start to figure that out and have some clearer answers, their hiring decisions will be, brought to the forefront a little bit.
Yeah, one of the questions I had seen was kind of, given everything that's going on, you know, what do you see the biggest shift being in the interview process? I think, you know, recognizing that it's going to be a virtual process. And so taking that how you will, if you don't think, you know, your own kind of digital competency is up to par, you know, practice, try Zoom calls with friends, Skype calls with friends. I, you know, had to pull up a Skype ID that I pretty much don't really use. I think we're all, you know, getting more comfortable sitting in front of our webcams and going from there. So practicing that is going to be a huge part of it, and practice makes perfect. I mean, I'm still a little bit awkward in front of the camera sometimes, but I'd like to think I'm getting better.
Someone's asked about how to gauge how a school is faring financially. So the worry is leaving a job, then receiving a letter from the school during the summer saying that they're cutting staff, since schools are unsure about enrollment and you know, so maybe some funding issues. So that's a good question. I feel like that kind of speaks a little bit to contracts, and there might be some additional language in newer contracts that kind of say, like, we don't totally know what courses you're going to be teaching, or, you know, it might just be a little bit more unsettled. You know, I think especially now going forward for schools that are doing hiring, I think, you know, most likely they have a pretty good sense if they're hiring you now that you know, they're going to need you. I think, I don't know, Alex or Namita, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, you know, what we're finding, I think, is that for any schools that have an opening right now, they're very confident that that's the need, and whether or not things start on campus or, you know, remotely, that, you know, that you're moving forward for the fall. I think schools are doing a great job of, if there are any questions, they're not listing a position, and you know, they're, you know, covering things internally or waiting to see how things kind of break out. So for those that are, you know, moving forward, they are actively and confidently hiring.
Yeah, and I might also just add, kind of thinking about the specifics of a school. I think every school has a bunch of different plans as to what the fall is going to look like. And that kind of maybe varies too on where it is and following their own state's guidelines and things like that. So I think this is a type of search where you're going to have to put a little bit more research into the background of a school and things like that, and you know, do a little bit maybe more work on the forefront, just to kind of make sure that, you know, it does feel like it's going to be a school that's a good fit. You know, it's going to feel like it is a search that's viable for your own, you know, what you're looking for as well.
Mm-hmm. I've seen a bunch of questions about transitioning from higher ed, and you know, how to kind of frame a demo lesson, and you know, will schools seriously consider me, or is it different with what's going on now? You know, Alex and Namita and I've worked with a lot of people who have come from higher ed to successfully get jobs teaching at independent schools, and I think you know, the one thing to always kind of keep in mind or sort of frame for hiring contacts is, you know, kind of showing that you get where younger kids are emotionally, because I think, you know, intellectually, you know, you could say there's not a huge difference, but I think in terms of where they're at emotionally, kind of reaching them sort of where they are, is important. So I think, you know, for the demo lesson, I mean, it's, you know, you might have to engage with younger kids a little bit differently than you would college students. So, you know, if you have a demo lesson of you teaching college students, you know, that you could include that with a, you know, kind of a write-up about how you'd adapt that for younger kids, or just start thinking about it. You know, what are some things that you do with your college students that you think would work really well for high school students, you know, and what do you think you'd have to change about your approach? You know, because I think it's more just sort of anticipating that question, you know, why do you want to work with younger kids? What's appealing to you about that? What do you think would, you know, work about your teaching style? What do you think you'd need to change? And sort of just answering the questions almost before they get asked.
Yeah, I think sometimes, you know, the content ability and the content expertise, if you're coming from higher ed, a lot of times is, you know, assumed, but the questions come on the student life side and the connections, and having the you know, the ability in the classroom, you know, for some coming from higher ed, a lot of it is lecture based, and you know, at the independent schools at the secondary level, it's very hands-on. I think, you know, flexibility too is important. You know, I think schools have a more difficult time finding someone who could teach, you know, 9th grade ancient history versus someone who could teach AP US or AP World. So not coming in with the mindset of necessarily, I want to teach all the honors courses and all college prep and everything, right, but having that flexibility, working with younger students, you know, if it's, you know, K through 12 or a 6 through 12 school, you know, being open to teaching a 7th or an 8th grade course, or you know, whatever it might be. So I think, you know, that any way you can, you know, like Maddie said, you know, anticipate those questions, answer those questions about student life and connecting with students from the outset is great. And, you know, lean on any advising work that you've done, and you know, we all, Maddie, Namita, and I know from experience, a lot of you all from higher ed are making that move because you want to teach and you want to focus on that and build those connections with students. And so sharing that, I think, is you know, important, and what schools are looking for, you know, for their teachers.
Yeah, one thing I always kind of reiterate, and this is kind of just building off of what Maddie was saying, but for those transitioning from higher ed, you know, the difference between a freshman in college and a senior in high school is not that much, but the difference between a freshman in college and a freshman in high school is a lot. And kind of know that going in, and be ready, you know, when someone says, you've done a lot of teaching and I see that you've done these freshman courses, how would you translate that to, you know, a 14-year-old taking their first freshman high school class? So, you know, be ready to answer that question and acknowledge that difference.
And, you know, also there are, you know, expectations outside of the classroom, you know, along with your advising and your teaching, that, you're going to be someone who gets involved in coaching or, advising clubs, or if it's a boarding school, involved in, residential life. So I think, from the outset, especially in the cover letter, that's a great place to show that you've done some, insight and maybe mention, along with things that interest you about the position, things in the community that, really interest you too. Oh, I'd love to take part in your Model UN program, or, I played tennis in high school and would love to, coach. That's another way to show, that you have that passion for, being and working with kids and being a part of the community. And also that you've done a little, extra research on the school as well. So I think those are great things.
I've seen questions about how to help yourself stand out in a subject area like English or social studies, which is, definitely probably, a more competitive area, I would say, than math or science. And actually someone asked earlier why we're doing this as a humanities team as opposed to just everyone in general. And humanity, it's different. I think, there are a lot more teachers who are able or who want to teach history and English over Spanish or physics or math. And so how to help yourself stand out. I mean, I think, one of the big things is what kind of Namita was talking about earlier, kind of making sure that, you have your best references up there, your resume is up to date, like just making sure there's no questions that someone would ask when looking at your profile. Like there's nothing that needs to be pieced together. Like it all just kind of makes sense. It's updated. It's, the people that you want to be your references are your references. But like I said, just also thinking about things that you might not have necessarily known to highlight before, like the technology that you're fluent with. Like I said, if you have a diversity teaching statement or a statement about how you've transitioned to virtual learning, or I don't know if you want to update your personal statement, just kind of talk about your teaching approach in general. If you haven't taught virtually, what are some ways that you think you might shift your teaching to a virtual, like how would you do that? Because I think that's one of the, sort of the tough things about hiring for next fall is that, so many schools just don't quite know yet what it's going to look like. So finding people who are adaptable and creative and find ways to reach kids, in different ways and connect with them, that itself is going to help you, whether you have a ton of virtual teaching experience or not. If you're the type of person who can kind of look at something creatively and say, well, this is an idea that did, the same way in a normal classroom, like this didn't quite reach the people that I wanted it to reach, or it didn't quite land the right way. I think I'm going to look at things from a different angle, or, work with this person one-on-one, and, start thinking about those things and maybe writing about it a little bit. And, for me, I think that's what I would do and what I would recommend. I don't know if Alex or Namita, you guys have anything that you think.
I was just going to say that's such a great point. I think, Maddie, that knowing that we are in strange times, no one's getting it perfect, and so I think it's okay. And actually, a huge positive on the school side if you're talking about something that maybe you tried or didn't quite work, or took a gamble on, or would do differently. I think these schools are looking for someone who is growth minded, but more than that, someone who is not afraid to try new things, not afraid and enjoys working collaboratively and thinking creatively and taking different approaches, and is also receptive to feedback and internalizes feedback and improves with that. I think a lot of those things are just inherent in being a teacher. And so as much as you can, show that and be honest is great. And I think, sometimes, after you may give a demo lesson, if you're doing a demo lesson, you may have a discussion with the school after about what you did and what it looked like. And all the feedback may not, appear as completely positive. And part of that is then seeing how you handle feedback and how you, work with them as a team and would make changes. So I think all those things are great. But another thing too, it is, there are certain areas of the country as well that are more competitive than others. So if you're thinking about ways to stand out or explore, having the ability to look in different locations, maybe being open to, okay, maybe I take an opportunity, not in my top area of interest or not at my, the place I want to be for the rest of my life, but at a school and an opportunity that, I'm interested in, would be a good opportunity, a good challenge, and would help me, make those next steps in my career to get, that experience to help me stand out, especially if you're making a career change or coming from higher ed or starting your career, or, looking to make a shift more towards a community where maybe there's growth for leadership or something like that. I think having as much flexibility as you can is as much as possible is another way to really help stand out. Because we work with amazing schools all over the world, and just because the school may not be in New York or San Francisco or LA, which are highly competitive, doesn't mean it's just not as amazing of a place, and would be a great benefit for you long term. So that's another thing to think about if you can.
One question I saw that I thought was an interesting one was, how do you demonstrate classroom management skills versus curricular skills during the virtual hiring process? And I think that's a great question. I would say similarly to an on-campus process, an in-person process, I think, there are going to be interview questions that hit on both of those. So having some examples for each, how have you done, shown classroom management? Can you give an example of this? And if you were to teach this class, what books might you bring in that wouldn't, be the norm, or I think just having as many examples as you can for each would be great. I think people will look for different things. Those are both skills that schools are going to want to see, so they will kind of lead you to showing those, both in a demo lesson and I think during interview questions.
I've seen a couple questions about maybe following up. Maybe there's a school that you were in touch with in March, had some conversations or were exchanging emails, and then, things got put on hold. And, I think, if you've been communicating with the schools, relaying, things might be on a freeze for a little bit. We're trying to figure things out and make a plan. I think, as Maddie put it at the beginning of our webinar, I think from about mid-March to early May, schools were kind of in lockdown mode of figuring out the day-to-day of what everything looked like, and okay, what are all of our teacher schedules for our teachers that are parents? What expectations can we put on them? What will the day look like? What are our thoughts on next year? If we'll be starting virtually, kind of navigating those plans. So you may have heard from a lot of them that we're going to, kind of put things on hold, but, we'll reconnect in the coming months as things slow down. And I think it's totally great to follow up and reiterate your interest, to those schools, especially if you connected earlier in the year. Some of them may still be on a freeze. Some of them may, have put things on hold and they're still waiting out. And others may be starting up their process again. So the timing could work out really well. In the very least, especially if you connected or reached out, it's, an opportunity that, you've made a good connection with or shown interest in. So maybe that's something that comes up in the summer, maybe it's something next year, maybe it's something down the line, but always leaving a good taste in their mouths is great. But I think it's totally fine and absolutely acceptable. And I encourage, reaching out to reiterate your interest and let those schools know that you are still interested if if they're moving forward, and you know, to get an update on their timeline. I think that's absolutely reasonable, and great to do.
One question I saw is about, will it be harder for newer teachers or teachers with less experience to get hired right now? No, we haven't heard that. You know, some schools, you know, might need someone like a more veteran teacher for a department, just depending on the makeup of that department. Like if it's, you know, if they have a lot of veteran teachers, they might say, we're pretty open, we're able to work with someone and kind of bring them up to speed. Other times, you know, they might not be able to do that. But I think, you know, we've also heard from a lot of schools that say, like, again, we don't know what the fall is going to look like. And if we have teachers who are really good technologically and have a lot of familiarity with different online resources, you know, we'd be interested in that person. So I think, you know, highlighting your skills and helping to make a really clear connection for a school, you know, why your skills would work for them right now. So taking kind of the guesswork out of it for them as much as you can, and making a kind of clear-cut case for yourself.
I might just add to, you know, this spring, pretty much everyone became a new virtual teacher. And so, you know, a lot of folks are, you know, adapting to new things and figuring it out. So in that sense, you're not alone in you know, coming new to teaching in a lot of ways, because, you know, the teacher that might be phenomenal in the classroom might really be struggling with, you know, a virtual lesson, and trying new things. So don't be afraid to, you know, feel like you're coming into a new space. A lot of teachers went through that this, you know, a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, and I think, you know, again, if you haven't been teaching, if you don't necessarily have, you know, the fluency and you know, and all of these resources, you know, I think this is a great time, you know, to do research, reach out to peers or friends or, you know, people that are doing this work that may be able to give you some insight and you know, talking points. So if the school does reach out or connect, you have some ideas in place, you know, about, you know, what that might look like for you. But it's okay if you don't, you know, have these things, but it is something to highlight if you do. And if you don't, it's a good time to, you know, do some research or maybe reach out to people to gather insight if you can. Let's see. So we're at 2 o'clock. I think we have time probably for at least you know, 1 or 2 more questions. So we'll go over by a little bit. And I'm just going through. Feel free to jump in if you all see.
Yeah, sorry, I'm scrolling right now.
Some of these, what's good to see is some of these questions are overlapping too. So I'm glad.
Yeah, I'm hoping that some of them. I feel like I've seen a couple people ask about either taking a non-teaching job for a year or going back to grad school for a year, and kind of how that would look when they then got started searching for teaching jobs again. And I think that's fine. I mean, it's not going to negatively affect you. And whether that is a degree for a subject specific area or a degree in education, you know, both are great. Schools tend to look for both. So I would say, you know, if you have an undergrad degree in English and then wanted to do a, you know, master's of ed, then that's a great balance. If you know, if your undergrad degree was maybe, you know, not English specific, but you want to be teaching English, maybe focus more on those subject area master's degrees, master's degree programs. And similarly, you know, I think if you're doing something else for a year, that's fine. You know, I think, you know, we also always see kind of mid-year openings. I you know, we'll see. I feel like it's so hard to make predictions right now just because we're so, you know, trying to wait and see what's going to happen. But I would imagine that, you know, as schools kind of figure that out, more positions might open up, or, you know, some mid-year positions might open up. So it, you know, on our end, it's not something where, you know, this day hits and the hiring season's closed. You know, we'll still be getting openings, and schools will kind of be figuring out their needs as they go.
One question I saw was kind of back to the how to highlight yourself or how to set yourself apart. One thing that I kind of talk about specifically to resumes, but I think right now might be applicable kind of across the board is I call it the 5-second and 5-minute rule. In 5 seconds of looking at your resume, or in this case, your profile, and you can take a look at through Candidate Connect of how schools are viewing you. A school should be able to get the sense of who you are, what you're doing, what you're looking for. And then within 5 minutes, feel like they've kind of gleaned a little bit more of your search and how to best, if it's going to be a good fit for a school. I think that's something that that's going to be really kind of applicable to a search generally now. Someone said, how do I make myself stand out in a large pool? I think clarity is a huge thing. If a school has to kind of piece together all the different parts of what you're looking for and your own background, that's going to be difficult. So trying to make it as easy as possible for a hiring contact to take a look at your documents, take a look at your profile and say, okay, yes, Alex McLean, I can see what they're looking for and what they have to offer.
Thanks. I'm not sure what happened. My Q&A went away, but if there are any other questions you guys want to cover, I think we have time probably for one more.
Let's see.
And again, if you submitted a question and we haven't gotten to it, feel free to email us, but we'll be going through these too, and reaching out. And I know that Julia's been going through and answering some of your questions as well. So I hope that has been informative, but don't feel like everything stops today. If you need anything from us, that's why we're here, and we're continuing to work and do our best to put you in touch with with opportunities that we're seeing on our end.
One person asked if they've signed a contract but still interested in looking elsewhere for next year. Does it look bad if I ask my school? If I ask the school I'm applying to if they could not contact my current employer? I would say, like what we would say kind of across the board, is that once you've signed a contract, you should cut the search. We will not keep referring you to new positions once you've signed your contract. Our kind of position on that is that, we won't help you break a contract. If there's a specific reason behind your search, or it's, for whatever reason that may be, we would just need to get, kind of confirmation from your administrators, the either head of school or, upper school head or whomever, that it's fine if we continue working with you on your search, just to make sure it's all kind of above board.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, as we all know, independent schools are a small world, and if something's come up where you have signed your contract and you need to go, or you need to move on, or that's a situation where it sounds like you need to have that conversation with your school, and as long as we know that it's okay, we can still help. But if you've signed your contract, it's definitely not in your best interest to ever break a contract, unless it's extreme circumstances that your school knows about and has given you prior approval. But it can on top of everything else, can also have negative repercussions long term for your search and your career. Yeah, that's kind of our stance.
And one last question that I saw that I thought was a good one was, we were talking a lot about kind of online materials and how to kind of, add more to your teaching portfolio. And someone was asking, are you talking about creating kind of a separate personal website with teaching resources? Or are you talking about submitting more documents to Carney Sandoe? And I would say either or both. We have space that if you did have your own personal website with teaching resources, you could include a link right to it on your Carney Sandoe site. And so that way schools will see both. You know, if you have zero interest in creating a personal website, you can also, you know, just submit additional materials that kind of touch on some of the things that you might include in a website, you know, curriculum planning and videos, that sort of thing. So I think either or both. I feel like we've seen people do it really successfully both ways.
For sure.
But if you do have a personal website, make sure we do have it, because I think it's just another great resource that we can include to kind of show who you are as a teacher.
Yeah, I think generally with all these things, if it's something that you have and a resource that's there and something you've been doing, that's something great to include. But don't feel like if you don't have it, it's going to have a negative effect on your search or you know, would hurt you. But you know, with this time too, you know, some different ideas of some things to think about or maybe put together if you have the time or able to do, you know, that research. Yeah. And, you know, this last question, you know, that I see is, you know, kind of the trying to find that balance between, you know, being flexible and what you're looking for and how to navigate that and, you know, being true to yourself and what you can actually do and then also being open to ideas. And, you know, what I'd say there is, you know, that's a great place for us to be a resource as well, just to give you a sense of, okay, these are kind of the opportunities that we're seeing. These are the opportunities that are out there. And, you know, sometimes you're not flexible for every single thing, but you may be flexible for the right thing. And so we're always happy to take things and work on kind of a case-by-case, you know, basis. You know, we know the search is for everyone is nuanced and, you know, there are certain things that you're looking for and may be able to consider and, you know, time of year can, you know, certainly affect that as well. So, you know, always lean on us, you know, if you have questions there, you know, just as far as how to, you know, navigate that. And we're happy to, you know, be as flexible or as targeted as you like, but you know, in my experience, sometimes you may see something that you know, really catches your eye that wasn't the first place that you thought to look. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
For taking part, and you know, really appreciate this. Again, this was all recorded, so everyone will receive a copy. But you know, again, you know, we're always here to help Leanne as well. For anyone on the history and religion search side of things, you know, we're happy to help and be a resource, and you know, hope that this you know, was helpful today, and that everyone is well and safe and enjoys a nice weekend.
Yeah, thanks everyone so much for tuning in, and so glad that we made it through without any interruptions.
I think I lost video for like a minute.
You did, for like just a short, like.
Probably a welcome break for everyone to get Alex not talking for a couple minutes.
Well, thank you all. Have a great weekend, and I'm sure we will all be in touch, you know, in the coming weeks. So let us know. We'll try to reach out if we've seen questions that we didn't get to specifically, and otherwise, you know, let us know. Give us a call or shoot us an email.